If Nairobi had a slogan, it would be survive first, dream later. After graduating from college, I thought I was destined to conquer the city. I had my degree, my hope, and a small suitcase filled with outfits that screamed, "Hire me, I'm professional." Reality, however, was a slap in the face. Nairobi wasn't a city, it was a battlefield. Graduates were as common as hawkers, and jobs were scarcer than rain in January. Every interview felt like a Hunger Game, only I never got the prize. At 28, my CV was longer than some people's relationships, but none of the jobs I landed ever paid enough for, financial independence. And then there was my family. God bless my parents, but their calls felt like scheduled interrogations. "Brenda, why aren't you married yet?" my mother would ask. "Mom, I'm trying to figure my life out." Life? What life? You're not getting any younger, my dear. Women are like avocados. They ripen and go bad quickly. My father wasn't any better. What's the point of all that education if you can't even bring us a son-in-law? He'd grumble. The pressure was suffocating. But in the midst of this chaos, like a knight in shining armor, or so I thought, came Eric. It was one of those Friday evenings when Nairobi CBD resembled a rugby scrum. People pushed and shoved as public service vehicles, blaring loud dancehall music, hooted like they were auditioning for a horror film soundtrack. I was at the Roy Sambu queue, clutching my handbag like it contained state secrets, when a deep voice interrupted my internal monologue of misery. "Excuse me, is this the line to Roy Sambu?" I turned, and there he was, tall, dark, handsome, the holy trinity of Kenyan heartthrobs. He looked like the kind of guy whose phone ringtone was a jazz tune, not a clanging reggae hit. His suit was crisp, his smile disarming, and his cologne hinted at money. "Yes, it is," I replied, trying to sound nonchalant, even as my heart did a little somersault. By the time we boarded the bus, we were chatting like old friends. He introduced himself as Eric, a contractor with a taste for the finer things in life. "I don't usually take buses," he said, flashing me a smile that could have powered a small village. "But my car is at the garage." I didn't question it. In Nairobi, owning a car automatically made you eligible for sainthood. Eric wasted no time. By the next weekend, he had asked me out for dinner. He picked a restaurant in Westlands that I'd only seen in glossy magazines, the type where they serve food in portions so tiny you wonder if the chef hates his job. When he arrived, he was driving a sleek black Mercedes-Benz. The door swung open, and I swear I heard angels sing. This was it. The universe had finally smiled upon me. Over dinner, Eric painted a picture of a man who had it all together. He spoke of his projects, his plans to build a hospital in the village, and his dream of retiring by 40. Every word was like poetry. When the bill came and he paid without flinching, my salary's worth was spent on the date. I thought, God, is this my husband? But even fairy tales have fine print. Things started to feel off. For starters, Eric never invited me to his place. "Kahawa isn't presentable right now," he'd say with a sheepish smile. "The apartment is undergoing renovations. You know how these contractors can be." I nodded, choosing to believe him. Why wouldn't I? Love, after all, was about trust. Instead, Eric made himself at home in my modest bedsitter in Roy Sambu. a space barely big enough for me, let alone the two of us. Yet, he seemed surprisingly at ease, kicking off his dusty shoes and lounging on my only chair like he owned the place. That comfort unsettled me, but I brushed it aside. Then came the requests. The first time, it was 10K. My mom is unwell and my cards aren't working, he said, his eyes pooling with worry. His voice was so sincere, so heart-wrenching, I didn't even blink. Without hesitation, I transferred the money, telling myself, this is love. It's about supporting each other in hard times. The second time, it was 20K for an emergency. I'll pay you back next week, he assured me, squeezing my hand. You're my ride or die, Brenda. The third time, it was 30K. He claimed Mogus had stolen his wallet, ID, and everything else. Without those documents, I can't access my accounts, he lamented. You're the only one I can count on. By now, my bank account was gasping for air, but I silenced the alarm bells in my head. This is temporary, I thought. He's a good man going through a rough patch, but the cracks were becoming harder to ignore. The dust on his shoes started bothering me more than his excuses. If he really owned a Mercedes-Benz, why did he often look like he'd walked through the savannah? And why were his emergencies always conveniently timed with my payday? I tried to shake off the doubts, telling myself love required sacrifice. What I didn't realize was that Eric wasn't in love with me. He was in love with my wallet. One evening, Eric leaned back in his chair, the glow of my cheap bedside lamp casting shadows on his face. Brenda, he said with the kind of conviction that could sell sand in the Sahara, I'm building a house in the village. Once it's complete, we'll move in together and start our life as a family. But I need just a little more funding to finish it. His words felt like a rescue rope thrown into my sinking boat. The pressure from my parents to settle down was at an all-time high, and Eric seemed like the perfect solution to all my problems. My friend Sophie, however, wasn't convinced. Brenda, this man is full of stories, she warned one afternoon over tea. A house in the village? How come you've never even seen it? And why does he need your money when he drives a Benz? Sophie, I sighed, rolling my eyes. You're just being overly suspicious. Not every man is a scammer, you know. But Sophie wouldn't let up. All I'm saying is, think twice. Love doesn't mean being a bank. I dismissed her concerns with a laugh, confident that my Eric was different. So, when he asked me to take out a loan, I didn't hesitate. This is for us, I thought, visualizing our future in that dream house. The very next day, I marched into the bank, my payslip clutched tightly in my hand. Like a woman on a mission, I signed away $400K without a second thought. Every shilling is yours, I told Eric with pride, handing him the entire amount for our future. But Eric had other plans that didn't involve me, a house, or any kind of shared future. And as I would later discover, my friend Sophie had been right all along. If you enjoy this story, please like, comment, and subscribe. The first bombshell hit me when I bumped into a familiar face in a supermarket aisle. I was balancing a basket full of groceries, distractedly selecting the cheapest items to stretch my budget when I saw her, Lucy, a woman I'd met briefly through Eric. "Oh, hi, long time," I greeted her warmly. She smiled politely, then asked casually, "How's Eric? Haven't seen him in ages. I beamed, always happy to talk about my man. Oh, he's busy with work, as always. You know how contractors are. Her expression froze, her smile fading into something resembling pity. Contractor? She repeated, her voice laced with confusion. Yes, Eric. He's always traveling for projects. He's been handling that hospital construction in the village, I added, feeling oddly defensive. Lucy's laugh came out sharp, like a knife, slicing through my delusions. Sweetie, she said, lowering her voice, Eric doesn't even own a bicycle, let alone a car or a construction business. Are we talking about the same Eric? Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. My knees felt weak as a nauseating wave of realization washed over me. The sleek Mercedes-Benz he drove, borrowed. The stories about his Kahawa apartment? Lies. The house in the village I had gone into debt for? Non-existent. I stood there in the supermarket, blinking back tears as Lucy rattled off tidbits about Eric's real life. He was a hustler, she explained. A man with no stable job, no assets, and a knack for manipulating women into funding his lifestyle. Later that evening, after hours of piecing together every inconsistency I had ignored, I confronted him. My heart raced as I demanded answers, expecting at least a hint of remorse, but Eric didn't even flinch. Babe, why are you acting like money is everything? He said, his tone calm, as if he hadn't just ripped my life apart. That night, I kicked him out of my life. My tears soaked my pillow, mingling with regret and anger. I wasn't just heartbroken, I felt humiliated, a fool who had willingly handed over her trust and her future to a con artist. The days that followed were a whirlwind of despair and regret. Mornings felt like battles just to get out of bed, my body heavy with the weight of debt and heartbreak. My bank statements were a constant reminder of my naivety, numbers staring back at me, mocking my misplaced trust. I avoided my parents' calls, unable to face their inevitable questions about why my perfect boyfriend was no longer in the picture. How could I explain that I had let love blind me into borrowing $400K, leaving me strapped with payments I couldn't even begin to afford? The shame felt unbearable. My nights were the worst. Lying in my tiny bedsitter in Roysambu, I replayed every conversation, every lie, every ignored red flag. How had I missed it? The dusty shoes, the constant money emergencies, the borrowed car. It was all so clear in hindsight, but at the time, I'd been so desperate to prove to myself and to my parents that I had made it. Eventually, I hit rock bottom. The electricity in my apartment was cut off because I couldn't pay the bill, and I spent 2 days eating dry bread and instant coffee. That was when it hit me. I could either drown in my sorrow or fight my way out of it. I decided to fight. I enrolled in therapy, an expense I could barely afford but knew I couldn't avoid. My therapist helped me unpack the root of my desperation, the societal pressure, my parents' expectations, and my own insecurities. Slowly, I began to see Eric not as the sole villain, but as part of a bigger picture of self-doubt that I needed to confront. Then, when I wasn't even looking, life surprised me. At a community workshop on financial literacy, Ironically, a class I'd signed up for to prevent future Eric situations. I met someone new. He wasn't flashy. He didn't drive a Mercedes or promise me the world. But he was kind, honest, and genuine in a way I hadn't known I needed. For the first time in years, I felt seen, not for what I could give or the expectations I was trying to meet, but for who I truly was. It wasn't a fairy tale ending, but it was real. And this time, that was more than enough. Looking back, I've come to realize that Eric was less of a boyfriend and more of a life coach in disguise. Granted, he was the kind of coach who stole your lunch money and left you for dead on the field, but a coach nonetheless. Here are the golden nuggets I extracted from that expensive mess. Actions speak louder than words. Eric had a PhD in sweet talking, but when it came to delivering, he was an intern at best. Moral of the story? Don't fall for grandiose promises. Watch what people do. If someone says they own a house in Kahawa, but spends more time in your bedsitter than you do, run. Your gut never lies. Remember that nagging feeling I had when his shoes were mysteriously dusty after supposedly driving a Mercedes? That was my gut waving a giant red flag and blowing a whistle. If something doesn't add up, don't wait for a neon sign to confirm it. Trust that inner voice. It's smarter than your heart. Love yourself first. Society will pressure you, your parents will nag, and Instagram will mock you with its engagement announcements. Ignore it all. The only ring you need is one of self-respect. When you're secure in who you are, you'll spot the Erics of this world from a mile away. These lessons didn't come cheap. I'm still paying off the loan, but they've made me wiser and, dare I say, funnier. Because if you can't laugh at yourself for being conned by a guy whose construction business was as real as my chances of marrying Idris Elba, what's the point? Today, I share my story not out of bitterness, but as a cautionary tale. Nairobi is crawling with Erics, men armed with fake charm and a plan to make you their next unpaid intern. Ladies, stay sharp. True love is out there, but it's hiding behind a thick forest of nonsense. And Eric? Last I heard, he was pitching his dream project to another woman. I hope she has Google and maybe a financial advisor on speed dial. If you enjoyed this story and want more, please like, comment, and subscribe to this channel. Cheers, have a good one.